the first thing I did was to transcribe every interview that I had. There's a lot of interviews. I'm opening this document right now. It is 425 pages long. I was like, of course there's a Classic Tetris World Championship, and of course people fly in from, like at least all over the country and a few internationally, of course. And then only later did it even occur to me like, oh, that people would think that that's quirky or odd. I'm like, what do you mean? There isn't really a twist in this show. Like, it just is what it is. So I don't know. Yeah, like it's not like these people aren't in a cult. We're not like revealing information. You know what I mean? I care a lot about this sport. I don't watch any sports, dude. Like, this is my sport. So whenever, Tetris is on, I'm usually watching.
It takes time, dedication, and passion to work 10 years on one series. And even though Chris had multiple opportunities to throw the towel in the ring, raise the white flag, give up, he didn't. Hi, my name is Frank, also known as SirMaser. Welcome to the Season 5 premiere of the Piece Dependency Podcast. This past summer, finally, the Best of 5, the Classic Tetris Champion, got released a 5-part Classic Tetris documentary about the 2014 Classic Tetris World Championship. So reason enough to invite director, writer, editor, man of the project, Chris Higgins, back on the show for the second time after 4 years apart. You can tell it's 4 years apart, and the reasons why the project got so delayed, because it was promised in 2021 and we got it in 2024. We also talked about the Classic Tetris World Championship being back in person and the future of Classic Tetris Documentaries. This is our conversation. Chris, welcome back to the Piece Dependency Podcast, and thank you so much for doing this again.
Thanks. It's great to be here. It's been a couple of years, and probably in the same room with the same mic and the same headphones, but lots of things have changed.
Well, for me, it does, because the last time we spoke was November of 2020, so it was in the midst of the pandemic. I lived in my old house, so I do still have the same mic, still headset, and but the house has changed.
Yeah, I mean, I listened back to that thing about maybe a month or two ago, and I was like, here's a guy, me, who didn't know it was about to hit him, And yeah, I guess we'll get into that.
Yeah, well, like I said, I listened to it back too, and I was like, oh my god, my English is so... You hear how Dutch I sound.
I think, to be fair, I think you hear that. I don't think I mean, it's like, yeah. It's
probably, yeah, but I've listened to every intro of every episode so far, because I wanted to make a clip or something like that, so I hear the transition of speaking Dutch English to a bit more English, but that's okay. We're here because of Best of 5, and the last time you were on the show, the Kickstarter was up. You hoped that the Best of 5 was coming out in 2021. That didn't happen.
Spoiler, yeah.
lot of things. The reason for, but I want to start with CTWC first before going to Best of 5, because you are the main camera operator for CTWC. 2020, 2021 were pandemic years, was online. So 2022, first time back in Portland, first time back in 3 years live, and you behind the camera.
Yeah, big change. It was a big show that year too. We were around 2022. We had this sort of rise in complexity in the years prior to the pandemic years. We're adding more cameras, more camera operators, and just more kind of quality. Going into comparing, say, like 2019, like the last live show before 2020, 2022, we didn't have rolling back then.
True.
We did have tapping. So we're trying even back then to think of how do we display as a camera shot players who are doing different things with their hands. And so that became a huge deal in 2022 because now we had to show like basically head to lap essentially, because you didn't know somebody could be playing anything. It could be some kind of tap grip, like a foot rolling grip, another rolling grip.
Yeah.
So we kind of re-architected that to be a shot that's higher up and looking down, which is a little bit, I don't want to say awkward, it's just different. Because our classic shot was like, you know, head and shoulders. So you could really see like a facial expression. But obviously now that rolling is a thing, it's such a factor to see the physicality of the players. We had to adjust for that. So that was part of it. The other part of it was coming out of a cave that I'd been in for this cave for like a couple of years and just being around people. And that was cool. It was really great. Although I think part, you know, to the topic today, part of it was like, so where's the movie? It's 2022. It's fall. Are you working on it? I'm like, I'm working on it. But like, I basically had been saying that since 2014, you know, or 2015, I guess. People are like, where's the movie? I'm like, working on it. And they'd be like, when's it coming out? I'm like, in a year. I have this real problem with saying stuff will be done in a year because it just seems like, oh, of course I could do anything in a year. I think I've learned an important lesson about that. But yeah, it was great to see everybody. And also, nobody gave me any real flack for not being done, but people were excited to see the thing and kind of like, so how's it going? But I remember part of the thing in 2022 was I recruited some people at the tournament to be in my test audience. So I showed episode 1 to some people online to get their reactions. And I was just sort of like, if somebody asked me about it, I'd say like, well, do you want to see a rough cut and give me some notes? So that was another way to kind of steer those conversations. But it was really cool to be back in person. Yeah, thanks. I mean, it worked. And, I'm wearing one of I think this is the 2023 shirt that I've got here, like the Danny color design. By the way, I think Danny's done the last 3 shirts in a row, which is pretty sweet.
Yeah. So. I mean, we talked on and off about Best of 5, like over the past 4 years, when it's coming out, do you have info and all that? So 2023 CTWC, still the same question, still important, but now 2024, the movie was out. We're in LA or Pasadena. So a lot of changes in 2024 for Classic Tetris, for the scene, with the game crash, with the LXC 60 million point world record. Now, finally, the Best of 5 series that is out. Classic, the CTWC now moving places from Portland, the good old Portland, going to Pasadena. Like, what was that change for you? Because you live in the Portland region, and so now you had to travel.
Right. For the first time in 12 years, it's not just like I drive, like a little ways across town. It's, it's a flight or it's a 2-day drive if I were to drive. So I didn't do that. A big change, in part because the way we've done the Portland tournaments is people who have equipment, like Nintendos, cameras, tripods, like bulky stuff, lighting gear. I have a basement full of stuff. And so it'd always be like, oh, I have a cable. I'll go back and get it and bring it back. I can't do that, if it's in California. So we had to enlist more people who were local. And I also, because I was finishing the movie, like right up until we released a week before. So I think it was May 31st or something like that. And then the actual tournament was literally 1 week later, that Friday. So in the lead up to it, I called up Vince and said, I am I want to do the job and do work, but I can't really do setup and be there a week in advance to do that stuff and provide things because I don't live there. And so he brought in Kyle Lowe to do that job. And Kyle just nailed it. And lives there and had access to great equipment, better than I've ever had. So basically Kyle came in, and also Gilbert Tang, who's been involved in this project for a long time, was a business partner of Kyle's and showed up to do still photos. And his still photos, if you haven't seen them, the photos from Gilbert are amazing because Gilbert is amazing at everything and doesn't really talk about it. If you go look at his Instagram, you're like, oh, you went on tour and followed like Weezer and took photos seemingly on the stage. It's amazing. Anyway, so humble. He doesn't really talk about it, but he's really, really good. Yeah. So it was the difference for me was instead of being in charge of it, I was just working the crew in 2024. And of course, it's a different city. So I kind of rolled in like the day before.
Yeah.
I came into that room and I'm like, wow, there's a stage, it's not just on the floor. There's video walls instead of projectors. So they're like emitting light instead of reflecting light.
Yeah.
Big setup. And it wasn't done when I came in like 6 p.m. the night before. Like it was kind of, it was like partly there. And those guys, you know, Kyle and Gilbert and the rest of that team were there until, I don't even know, midnight, 2 a.m, something like that.
Cool. Yeah.
I went back to the hotel because I had to get sleep because I was so tired. Because I'd been like editing up until the day I pressed the button. I was just like working. So
Cool.
also I had gotten COVID like in May.
No.
Somewhere in that month. So that was like my nightmare. And I hadn't actually gotten it. And so that was my first time. So
wow.
right leading into the release, I'm like, I've got stuff I got to do. I have COVID and I got to get on a plane in like 3 weeks or whatever. It did work out, but it was like, it was everything. Everything that could go wrong went wrong. But when he got to the tournament,
yeah,
it was like I didn't have it was a shared responsibility. And I wasn't the main person for the first time in a while in terms of the camera crew. And because the camera crew was now bigger and more complicated, there's all this wireless stuff going on. I just got to hang back and enjoy it. And I was like, it feels really good to go in and do work as part of a team. And the team is all good. And there's a joy in that. So what I did this year was there's a camera shot that you'd often see in like when you have a match, they would cut from the sort of normal camera to a super, super close up of like a face.
Yeah.
The super, super close up of a face was me.
Oh.
Almost all the time. Yeah. So I was on a tripod, like a camera on a gigantic tripod on wheels with a super telephoto lens way down on the ground. And I'm wheeling it like 10, 20 feet in between players. And I would get like a super ultra close up. We'd watch it for 5 seconds. Then it would cut away from it. I'd be like, oh, get the next one, you know, get it. Oh, get the next one. So it was just like bodily picking up this thing and like wheeling it over and moving it and stuff. It was like a little bit of a workout, but it was fun to do. But it was beautiful. Like it was really fun to do that. And we were all on wireless headsets and Kyle was calling the shots, literally saying, okay, Higgins, your shot is get player 2, you know, put him over in this part of the frame. And I'd go get that. And they'd be like, okay, we're going live with it.
Like a director in your ear.
Yeah. He was like a, you know, like a TD, a technical director.
Yeah.
So he was running the stream and we had a bunch of camera ops and we were all in these like, you know, oh, by the way, our wireless headphones usually are very bad. And so historically, there have been times when we even just abandoned them, just ripped them off because yelling was more effective. These ones were super good.
Oh,
so nice. you could be like, hey, Kyle, should I get this shot or that shot? And he's like, you totally hear it. It was amazing. So it was really fun. But the other thing was now that the movie was out, unlike the prior, 11 years, I'd walk into a room and people would go, Higgins, and like high five me. People who I don't recognize. And I'm like, thanks. And like somebody would hand me something to sign. And I'm like, whoa, you have like, where'd you get that? Like, okay. It was completely different from the sort of shame that I'd felt previously. Cause I'm like, I'm not done. I'm overdue. Everything's late. It's super late. It's ridiculously late. To like, it's done and people are happy. What is this new feeling? How do I deal with it? You know? So that was rad. That was the best part.
It was a nice set of changes, not being the main operator for the cameras, not having that guilt feeling that the documentary series isn't out yet. It was a brand new Chris Higgins.
Yeah, just here to have fun, you know. People would ask stuff about the movie, and it was like, yeah, well, let's go talk about it. Like, I stayed up until 3 a.m. one night talking to somebody who backed the Kickstarter, just came up and started talking, and I was like, oh, we are the same kind of nerd. Let's go talk. And we did. And then like, you know, some of the players came and talked to us for like hours. And at one point, Barrett drove by at, I'm not kidding, 2 a.m. And he like, you know, rolls down his window in his van. And he's like, hey, Higgins, does Scooty, is he at your hotel? And I'm like, I think so. I don't know. And he's like, well, here's his controller. And hands me this like leather bag or some kind of like zipper bag. And I'm like, why? Okay, what do I do? He's like, get this to Scooty. It's very important. And so I'm like, but I don't know. I don't have any communication. Like, I don't know. Like, do I go to the front desk? There's nobody there. It's 2 a.m. So I sent like a DM or something and he didn't see it. So the next morning I just got up at a certain time, walked downstairs and looked for somebody in like a Scooty shirt. I don't know who it was, like an uncle or something.
Yeah.
And I spot somebody and I'm like, and I hold up the bag and this guy's like, oh, Willis left his controller behind, huh? Here you go back to bed, the whole thing. It was great, but it was fun and it was just different, right? Because we've been
Yeah.
so long in one place. To have it be in a new place was very fresh and
Yeah.
rad. Yeah.
So, Best of 5, this past summer, it finally got released. The end of May, it got released on Vimeo. In early July, it got released on YouTube. But let's back up for the ones that haven't watched the Piece Dependency Podcast number 6. The first time that we talked about, let's create a little bit of timeline. You shot the movie in 2014 during the Classic Tetris World Championship film. In 2014, you got the idea from Adam Cornelius, like 6 months prior to that, like not making a direct sequel to Ecstasy of Order, but close to.
Yeah.
And then interviewing players, flying to various cities to interview players, like for example to go to LA to interview Harry Hong, Jonas Neubauer in 2015, and then editing. And there was a trailer released on Dailymotion or Vimeo, or
Vimeo.
I believe. Yeah.
In like 2015, maybe like October, September, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. With the subtext of this video will be out next year, or something along that line. And then various things happened. We talked about it in the previous podcast. And then 2020, the Kickstarter went up. You got on the podcast. Game Scout made a video about it. You got your goal within 8 hours and something like that. So then 2021 rolled around. You had the idea of releasing the podcast that year, but starting of 2021, Jonas Neubauer passed away, like in January 2021. And I think that was the first time that a major roadblock hit the project. Like, because you obviously knew Jonas Neubauer very close. You saw him, work with him, interviewed him. So what kind of impact had the passing of Jonas on the project?
It was terrible. I mean, I got a phone. I was sitting right here in this chair at this desk, and I got a phone call. And like at first, I thought I didn't believe it. Like I got a call maybe the afternoon before there was a public post, and in the course of anybody's life, occasionally you get that kind of call, right? Somebody's died. That's a hard call to make. I've made that call, and it's a hard call to receive. And the context there of who that person is to you matters. Jonas was not my best friend or anything. Like, a great guy. I worked around him a ton. I was his qualifier judge in the online years. And by the way, I don't even know if those got saved, but he had some really tough qualifiers, especially I think the first year. And obviously I'd sat with him and recorded various interviews over the years. And because he was consistently in the finals, I had sat like, I'm here, he's there. Every time in the history of all the CTWC that you see Jonas playing in a final, except for maybe like 2010 and 2011, I'm either there next to them or pointing the camera at him actively. So I spent a lot of time around this guy, and he's a central character in the film I'm working on. And so this was like a nuclear bomb going off in my head. Like, what then happened was an experience where I was really happy and excited to work on this film. I had just gotten funding. All these people were psyched and had, gotten into it. I suddenly felt, oh no, this is not the movie that it was. I have a different responsibility now. And if you listen back to the interview from like November of 2020, I'm so excited. It seems so simple. Like, okay, all I got to do is put this stuff in order, press a couple buttons, we're done. That's, and in that, in an instant between the moment I got the call and then the moment I hang up the phone, I realized that like my responsibility is different and unclear at that moment. I went from thinking, well, I'm making a sports movie about where the sport is Tetris to, yeah, it's still a sports movie, and it is the last known footage of Jonas Neubauer that has not been seen.
Yeah.
And it's not just a little footage, it's like hours of it, And what does that mean for everybody? So this movie for me turned from, it's like a cycle, right? So when I first shot it, I was like super excited, like let's get it done. And then I go into editing, that later that year and into the next year and realize, I've bit off more than I can chew. I don't really know how to construct a short version of this long arc. And then I get kind of embarrassed and freaked out. And then I don't have any resources to do that. So I kind of don't do anything for like years and years. And I feel ashamed of that. And then I bring it back up in, early pandemic time and say, let's do it. I don't have to, I can just like get it done. We get the money. We're like ready to go. And it's like, I think it's 2 weeks later, Jonas had been signing cartridges for the Kickstarter. He did a lesson for a fan. He did all this stuff as part of the funding. He was part of that process, and then he moves to, flies to Hawaii, and that's it. So then it crashes down again, right? What the hell am I going to do? So that was one thing. The other thing that I haven't really talked about, because I try to keep my sort of, Kickstarter updates and stuff kind of light. Later that year, my father-in-law also died, and then my uncle died, and then my father died. Also, my cat died in there too. The number of people in my life who are close to me, very small, from a small family.
Yeah.
And, half of them died in a very short time. And of course, Jonas was the first in that list. This editing process for me became an experience of trying to work through grief, to understand grief and to try to make meaning in the absence of the people who I used to look to help me understand what I was even doing.
Yeah.
My father was the guy I would take things to and say, what do you think of this cut? He used to work in film and TV. And then he's gone. So that, that's very heavy, but that's the reality of what this was behind the scenes. And that's part of why it took so long, this last go round. It's taken a long time for a lot of reasons, let's face it. But like, the other thing I didn't mention in all of this is there was a problem with losing editors. Yeah. So like when I went in, I had an editing team.
Yeah.
We even had like a contract. It was like, okay, we're going to pay this much money and you're going to do the whole edit and it's going to, whatever, which is part of why I was so excited about the Kickstarter. Like the amount of money it was minus that, there was still like leftover money, which would pay for probably Blu-rays and stuff. And I'm like, great. We're like, they work. I supervise that work. It gets done. We move on. And somewhere in there, I don't recall exactly when, that editing team had to back out for reasons that are like, they had other stuff in their life going on.
Yeah.
I said, oh, okay, that's a bummer. Hired a new editor in town. And then he moved away to Texas. And after that happened twice, I sat there and thought, like, look, I think the universe is telling me something here. I can't outsource the edit to anybody else. And at that point, Jonas was also gone. And I didn't think I could communicate to someone who wasn't in the Tetris world what Jonas means to us. So I thought, okay, the problem is not just editing this, it's learning how to edit a 5-hour long show. Because the longest thing I ever released before this was like 15 minutes long.
Yeah.
So to go from that to that was a lot. And I brought in my friend Carl King, friend from high school, who was going to do the score, the musical score. He's also a film editor.
Yeah.
And it was like a, in Star Wars where it's sort of like, help me, Obi-Wan, you're my only hope. It was that. I went to California and said, look, dude, I don't know anybody else in my personal life who actually can help me with this except you. You want to help me? And like, to his credit, he was like, sure, let's do it. What do you need? He saved the day.
Yeah.
And he provided that he basically taught me what I needed to know. And he did a bunch of the edit and began to force it onto me. I'm like, okay, hey, Chris, how about you do this part? And I'm like, oh, I don't know how. Do that part. I'm not sure how. Do it, and eventually he just sort of stopped. And then I went in and did the editing parts.
So, um, did you continue where the other editors left it, or did you start from scratch?
Scratch. Yeah. They had plans, but there wasn't any, there was nothing that was edited really that was usable.
Yeah.
There was some stuff. It's funny, actually, Adam Cornelius had done some pre-editing for that trailer back in 2015. And we'd made kind of a rough cut. And so there were some sequences that actually survive all the way into the current film. In episode 1, there's a sequence where Jonas wins the first 4, and there's like a, 2010. And I think Chris Tang says, Jonas, Neubauer. And then there's
Yeah.
another like 2011, and that sequence was an Adam Cornelius edit that we just kept because I'm like, well, that's the best way to do that. Let's just keep it going. But most things had to get redone totally from scratch.
Yeah. Was there a script that you already had, or was it still, because you have the documentary itself is like 5 hours long, but that isn't all the footage that there is.
Right.
So you had
Right.
to like sort out everything, and you kind of know, like, okay, you know what happened in 2014 because it's in your head and you're active with it. And but was there a script like, okay, this is everything that I need for episode 1, this is everything that I need for episode 2?
So it's kind of complicated. I'm going to open up a document on my computer just so I can give you a real number. The first thing I did was to transcribe every interview that I had. There's a lot of interviews.
Yeah.
I'm opening this document right now. It is 425 pages long, single spaced. That is 217,000 words. So like a novel is, that's 5 novels.
Yeah.
So just transcribing it took me several months. And then making sense of it took me several months to go through it and be like, okay, people said all this stuff in this, hundreds and hundreds of pages of stuff. What are the themes that are in this? And so that was what I was doing in the beginning of 2021, was just sitting there trying to digest, what do I have? Like, what are the themes? There's things I think in my head that I have, but then there's what I have tape of, right? What people talked about. So I'm going in there and trying to like grab clips and saying, okay, at this point in this tape, this person says this, that other person says it's something similar. Those are kind of going together. I had a bunch of those themes, and I went down to California and hung out in Carl's studio with a bunch of Post-it notes, and we had a big blank wall, and I would write like level 19, no next box was the thing that was in a bunch of the interviews. So I'd write that. That's a scene. I'd put that on the board, and then it was like, rivalry between Harry and Jonas. Like, that's a scene. Put that up there. How come it's CRT TVs? Everybody always asks, like, why is it CRTs? That's a scene. And I just kept finding more and more of these. And so I had all these little scenes, and then I had kind of characters where I was like, well, here's who I have a lot of tape of. Obviously there's a lot of Terry, there's a lot of Harry, there's a lot of Jonas. There's a fair bit of Bo. And so I'm like putting these people up saying, like, well, I have a lot of these people. So if I can find a way to make it make sense that I have a lot of those people,
yeah,
that'd be good. And we started kind of roughing in. That was actually around the time when some of the 5s started to come in, and I realized, like, oh, the top 5 seeds are also the top 5 people I have footage of, aside from Quaid, who was the number 1 seed. I have very little. I never sat down with him for an interview, but also Quaid, for that, kind of works because Quaid is this mystery man who just doesn't speak. He just like totally kills it in the qualifying round, but he's Quaid.
Yeah.
But then the other 4 guys, like the top 5 seeds, are essentially the 5 people who I say from the first episode, these are the ones we're going to look at. Someone in here is probably going to win. And in there, you've got Harry and Jonas and Bo and Terry and Quaid. And then as the episodes go on, we lose one of them each episode. So in episode 2, we lose Quaid. In episode 3, we lose I guess we lose Bo, and then episode 4 we lose Terry. So now we're down to just Harry and Jonas are left, and that's the finals, right?
Yeah.
So that structure became apparent in summer of 2021. So I'm like, that's the structure. We have these little wrap-up scenes at the end of every episode that sets that up. And then also I took all the scenes, like, why CRT TVs, rivalry between this person, that person, or also intro to whoever, Terry or Dana or whoever, and all those scenes. And I'm like, okay, well, I've got these matches, or I'm going to have these matches. where do I put the matches? And then leading into a match, I better know who's playing, ideally. Yeah. So I've got to put a scene for that. And very quickly I was like, okay, that's the cut. Like that's the outline for the whole thing. So we had this sort of Post-its on a wall thing, but that was very close to what we ended up with. Now, some of it, as we moved on, got trimmed way down, or sometimes things would get pulled out of an episode and like moved entirely over into a different episode.
Yeah.
Like part of the Harry and Jonas rivalry was in episode 1, and I moved it all the way over to 5. Like the thing where we saw the 2013 matchup, that used to all be in episode 1. And the problem was you saw it made episode 1 super long and kind of just too long. And then you forgot about it by the time 4 episodes later, they're going to go head to head again.
So it's the theme of that episode. Right.
That theme of 5 is it's these two guys for the third time. I wanted to show these two guys, So stuff like that. So it's close, like initially that was the plan. And then we, you make choices as you go. But that was pretty much it. And the way we tackled it was on a scene-by-scene basis. So I'd say, hey, Carl, here's the scene. Here's the footage that I can think of from going through the interview transcripts. Here's some B-roll I know I have. Give me something on this topic. And he'd go and make something, throw it across the, I'd look at it, and then I'd say, either let's add stuff or we're good, let's move on. And then eventually, he also didn't do any B-roll work, so it was just interview clips, but he would put up a little card that would say, Higgins B-roll goes here. Whenever it was like cut away to something because there's going to be an awkward like visual cut.
Yeah.
And sometimes he would say like, oh, maybe footage of close-ups of controllers go here, or like the line shots of the people on the line, stuff like that. And so that was always like left to me to kind of come in afterwards and clean up and put those things in.
Yeah.
So that was another thing I kind of started doing too.
So Carl made the scene by scene, like the interviews, that it's a little bit chronological or that it makes sense, and you polished it.
Basically, yeah. And he started with parts of episode 1. We did it a little out of order, because sometimes we just take things where I'm like, okay, this scene seems, intro to Bo is a very straightforward scene, because there's only one Bo interview that we use. Actually interviewed him twice, but I didn't use the other one. And then, we would do that, and then he would just hand it to me. And then later, once we had all that structure together, I added a bunch of other stuff. So for example, the beginning of episode 1, where you see Harry's eyes in close up at the very beginning.
Yeah.
And then all that like kind of quote montage about like, I didn't know if I would have a chance to win, and like, tears of frustration. I made that one day in like 2022. I just had one of those days where I'd been thinking about this problem for such a long time. Like initially the show was starting by being like, in 2010, here's some stuff that happened with Tetris. Yeah. And I'm like, it was so dry. It wasn't like hooky. It wasn't like grabbing anybody. And I thought, well, it'd be really cool if the movie basically began with a trailer for itself.
Yeah.
Like a couple minutes. And I just thought about like, what are some provocative things that people said, and how do I string them all together? And I just strung them all together. And so I'd sneak that in there. And occasionally I would also pull things that Carl had done a little bit apart, but mostly, what he had done was super solid. And I would do these like surgical changes, like dialogue edits to what people said, just like remove any possible spoilers. Because occasionally I'd interview somebody like after something happened, and they'd refer, and they basically were spoiling the movie. So I'd have to cut out a few words here and a few words there.
We'll be back with the conversation in a minute. But first, join the Classic Tetris Monthly Discord server. The Discord server is the main hub in Classic Tetris, and you can qualify for the monthly tournaments ranging from Masters event to the community tiers. Go to our link tree to join the Discord. Subscribe to the Piece Dependency Podcast YouTube channel. The first 32 episodes of PDP are available at full length, and new original content will be released in the next coming month. Follow Piece Dependency Podcast on the socials. Hit the link tree to follow us. Do you have a suggestion who you want to see next on the show? Let me know on the socials, or join our PDP Discord at bit.ly/PDP Discord and tell me there. Now, let's go back to the conversation.
The live premiere was, I think it was a week ago Saturday. It was really recent, the film festival in Portland.
Yeah.
That was the first time I've been in a room with more than 2 people watching it. And that was wild. And these are like just normal people, I mean, there were some Tetris people who came locally to see it, but it was just like people who go to a film festival were like, oh, there's a block of programming and there's a Tetris thing in there. We just showed episode 1 because we didn't want to show 5 hours. And there was a Q&A afterwards. And in that room, I got to like, you think when you're making something, like any kind of documentary or anything, and then you think, oh, this is funny. Like, this is a funny part. Or like, oh,
Yeah.
this is a poignant part. Or, oh, this is a stressful part. But you don't really know. And also, after you've watched that part 5,000 times, it loses all meaning. Like, you're just like, I don't even know what's funny anymore. I don't know if this matters. This might be terrible. Like, you just have no perspective.
Yeah.
So you have to kind of trust your past self to have made a pretty good choice because you don't know. And so this is the first time I'd seen a group of people watching it. And it was really interesting. The first thing they responded to big time was when Terry says his controller is named Turd. Like, that got a big laugh, and I was like, oh, thank God, people get it that's kind of funny and a little bit odd. And then, oddly enough, there's like a kind of intro to Tetris. How does Tetris work? They were super into that.
Yeah.
But the thing they were most into is when I show level 19 speed with just pieces dropping. That's all it is. People were like, oh.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay. Because to me, that's very normal. I'm very used to what 18 and 19 look. But of course I am. And then when they saw 29, there were like, people were getting out of their chairs. Like, they were standing up. They were like, oh, no. Whoa, 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 whoa. Like, what's going on? And like, you see that, like, by the way, Sharky did all that footage. You see that like Sharky clears some lines on 29 to get to 30, and they're like, whoa. Like, people were flipping out. And so that was really interesting. And when we got to gameplay, people were basically just like, they weren't like yelling, but you could hear them gasp when people would make a misdrop or even like clear a Tetris. They'd just be like, whoa.
Yeah.
It was so interesting that normal people were getting really, really into the gameplay. And I just felt so vindicated. I was like, oh, I made a good choice to put a crap ton of gameplay in this, which I think some people who are used to Tetris look at it and are like, that's 10-year-old DAS gameplay. Some of the games are pretty hot and interesting, but a lot of them are like, well, it just kind of ends 2-0,
Yeah.
But a normal audience, like non-Tetris, fans, were just losing it for the first match.
Yeah.
Terry versus Dana,
But that is what you wanted. Like, you said, this is for the Tetris community, but I make this for non-Tetris fans. Like, and this is the prime example that it worked, and that you got that, and that the feeling of people who are watching Tetris for the first time are like, okay, this is interesting. And if they're now looking up Tetris, they are like, oh my God, this is more intense than it was in 2014.
Yeah, it felt great. I mean, and the other thing that led me to sort of trust that before that was that, like, my marketing person, Aaron Rackelman, another college friend, like old friend, helped with some marketing around the launch. And I'd sent her the cuts right before I released them. And she watched them with her husband and her mom. And the night that they watched the first episode, her mom sent like a message through Aaron, like, tell Chris, this is amazing. I'm super into the gameplay. Like, it's just, I'm like locked in. I like can't wait. And then every night after that, I was like, tell Chris that. And I was like, you could just call me. I know her mom. We've met a bunch of times. But it was like, I'm like, okay, so if someone's mom, you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't matter who they are, but just someone who's not directly connected to the project is having that kind of reaction to it.
Yeah.
Holy crap. Like, that's great. So I think the challenge is, on the top of it, you say, oh, there's a docuseries about Tetris. A lot of people don't really want to just watch that. They don't say, oh, great, let me watch that, But if you can get it in front of them, the thing happens to them that happens at the tournament, which is people walk by, they look up, and they're like, huh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And they get kind of like lock in. So, and that was also the reaction, like the 2 nights or the night later, the night later at the film festival, I won the only award I was nominated for. And people were like, I loved it, and I don't care about Tetris. And I was like, I know, great, thank you. That was really interesting. So I feel like there is that split audience thing. Right now, I feel like anybody who cares about Tetris has probably either watched it or, maybe paused this and went to look at it at least a little bit. And so I'm hopeful that we can find the other folks somehow.
Yeah.
We work on something for 10 years. You hope that what comes out the other side is worth it, you know? And I think looking at it, I'm like, yeah, Like, I
Yeah.
think it holds up. It's odd in some ways because the film itself it doesn't really explain why it took 10 years to come out. I only realized that after the fact. I'm like, oh, never in the movie did we ever say the reason it's 10 years later is blah, blah, blah. I just left that part out. But I
Yeah,
feel like
but
if you watch the end of episode 5, you get a sense of like, oh, I don't know, some stuff happened, ... COVID, I don't know.
but it also doesn't matter.
Yeah, right. A lot of documentaries are historical anyway.
Yeah.
But I guess what it speaks to partly is like your experience, everybody's experience obviously is specific to where they live, what the time period is, how old they are, what they're into, and what they've been exposed to. And I have this it's weird. The amount of exposure that I've had to CTWC is very weird, and it's because of Adam Cornelius, because he's a friend of mine from a long time ago. I wouldn't be doing any of this if I hadn't known him and he hadn't just called me up and needed somebody to go volunteer at the tournament in 2012. That's why that happened. And so by the time 2014 rolled around, it all just seemed very normal to me. Like I was like, of course there's a Classic Tetris World Championship, and of course people fly in from, like at least all over the country and a few internationally, of course. And then only later did it even occur to me like, oh, that people would think that that's quirky or odd. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, I'm like, well, of course that's a thing that people have done, and I've been there and I've seen all this stuff. So to me, it's all old news, but there's all these things that are mythical, like the thing with episode 2 where Trey bracket snipes Jonas.
Yeah.
There's a thing, and there's all these things that were people were like had talked about and wanted to know about. And one thing I don't mention in the show, but was brought up to me afterwards, is apparently in one of those games, Trey tried to do a level 17 start.
Yeah.
Or at least that's the legend. I need to confirm this with Trey. It'd be easy to just text him and say, hey, is that true? I'm pretty sure that happened. I don't have audio that proves that it happened, but there's a little exchange where he tries to call a level start, and the ref, who's actually Vince Clemente's brother, kind of looks at him and says something. And then they somebody laughs, somebody else laughs, and they say something else, probably, okay, fine, level 18, then they start. But the thing was, for a long time, it was like, you can start on any level, 9 to 18, but not 17, because the colors, everybody hates the 17 and 27 colors. And it was like, I don't even know if it was a written rule, but that was one of the first things I had to learn as a referee, because it was like, I didn't know as a non-player that like those colors were just kind of hard to see. But yeah, so that was one of those things where that was kind of mythical. The Quaid max out was a little bit mythical. And I had a little bit of footage of that happening. And if you actually listen to I don't have it in the doc, but if you listen to the sound of this clip of Quaid and there's this crowd around him and people like pointing at him from the line, he's like complaining about how crappy the TV is, because it really is crappy. Like the picture is terrible. There's like snow all over it kind of.
Yeah.
And he's just like, this TV is terrible. And he's like busily just maxing it out, And he just like does it and he gets up and he's like, boom, okay, fine.
So how did you hear
Quaid.
Yeah, Quaid will always be Quaid, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But how did you find out that Trey wanted to snipe the bracket and see what Jonas ended up at? Where can I put myself that I will face Jonas in the first round? Because it is a big part of the second episode. Like, before the match between Jonas and Trey, you see like, I don't know, 5-6 minutes of Trey trying to snipe, a backstory of Trey trying to snipe. But there is a lot of footage of Trey playing, and I don't know if it's the footage of actual qualifying or maybe practice run.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah. So how did you come up with that story?
I didn't even know until probably, I mean, it was either later the next day or something. I didn't even know that had happened. Also, the interview we have with Trey, where he's sitting, like, you can see there's TVs behind him, and he's sitting kind of at the stage, actually. That was the day before qualifying. And so in that interview, one of the things he says at the end of it is, maybe I have something up my sleeve. And I'm like, But Trey's Trey. I don't know what he's talking about, right? And so he didn't say, I'm going to go bracket snipe Jonas tomorrow. I don't even know if he knew that at that moment. But the next day, clearly, he formulates this plan and then executes that plan. And the way that qualifying day worked out was we had one camera operator, Lewis Holland, and one assistant, Ben Dominguez, who was, Ben was kind of filling in. He was getting little shots here and there. And we used a few of them, but not a whole lot. Mostly it was one guy, Lewis. And so my instruction to Lewis was cover everything you can. Like, try to follow anybody who we think could be in the top 16 and get everything. Get a footage of their face, footage of their hands, footage of the TV, and kind of like go back and forth between those. like get footage of everything, like the line, because I didn't know what I was going to need, because also I don't know who's going to end up where, you know? And so this guy, and it's late in the day, it's like 4 p.m. or whatever it is, right before we're going to be done. Everybody's tired. We're ready to like move on. And he just keeps going. And that's when Trey starts to qualify. Like he's in the last little batch. And so the fact is, you see all this footage of him qualifying. That's the only, like every frame of footage that I have of Trey qualifying is like in the movie. Like there's nothing left on the cutting room floor. And, you know, he also keeps checking his phone, which is kind of interesting. Like he keeps like, he'll play a game, then he'll get his phone, because there was an online scoreboard that year. There's some kind of web thing where you could like refresh it and see exactly where the scores were. So he was looking to check as to where the cutoff was and how to, you know, get in there. So I got very lucky that I even had the footage to show that he qualified. And then that he laid out that whole narrative. Because the thing also that became apparent later in editing his interview was that Trey has been very close to two of the greatest Tetris players of all time, Jonas and Thor. He's like close enough that he knows them socially. He has footage of them together from a long time ago. He's made videos with them, put them online. So like this guy has driven a lot of Tetris history and doesn't brag about it. He's just kind of like, well, yeah, I just thought I'd, you know, put the video of Jonas's max out online. Well, that is what made Jonas be in the first CTWC. If he hadn't known about that, that would never have happened. And so I thought it was interesting to give him kind of this whole story arc around that. And what's also really funny is Jonas never mentioned that at all in our interview in 2015. He didn't say, yeah, that whole thing with Trey bracket sniping me really pissed me off. Didn't say a word. Didn't bring it up. I didn't think to ask about it because I was focused on the finals, you know?
Yeah.
And on like the Terry batch, which was right before the finals. He doesn't mention it at all. In 2018, talking to Arto Cal, he does mention it, not by name. Doesn't say anything about Trey by name. Just says, well, somebody singled me out and I didn't appreciate that.
Yeah.
Which again says a lot about who Jonas is, you know, that he is so classy that he wouldn't bring it up for 4 years. And when he does, he's not even naming the person, and that he's not salty about it. They're still friends. Like he would go over to, you know, he'd go over to the garage and play, you know, Trey Vision and stuff. So I don't know. That struck me quite a bit that happened and he didn't make a big deal out of it.
Yeah.
I would have, you know, I would have been like, yeah, you remember that thing that happened? That sucked.
Yeah.
So I didn't even know about some of that until pretty late into the editing game. Or I didn't think about it as being a big significant event.
Yeah. So one of the players in the game, Terry Purcell, didn't reach the final, but I felt like he was the storyteller of the series. Like if something needed to be explained, Terry was the one who does it. So how did that came about? Like he is also living in the Portland region, so he had a lot of opportunities to go and visit him.
Yeah. Well, yeah, in documentary there's a term we use, which is someone is a great talker, meaning you just put a camera on them and they just say complete sentences that you can easily cut together.
Yeah.
Terry Purcell is a great talker. He just is. Jonas is also great. And lots of these players really actually were like that. But Terry lives, you know, just across town. So it was very easy leading up to the tournament. I went over there over and over and over again. We would just set up in the basement, have a few drinks, and just kind of talk. And I would just record the whole thing. So I wanted to also keep in mind, like, I've gotten some feedback that's kind of like, why is there so much Terry in this movie? And part of the answer is, well, I had a lot of footage of Terry, you know, so that's part of why. But also the final rankings were Harry, Jonas, Terry.
Yeah.
And then I guess it was Eli or Elijah in fourth. And Elijah I couldn't get because he was being interviewed by BuzzFeed that year, and they wanted exclusivity. Yeah. That was a whole other thing. But I'm like, well, so the top 3 guys are my top 3 guys. Like my run time in terms of amount of time that I have interviews with them is that.
Yeah.
Now Terry might be like closer to 2 or 1, but he's in that mix. And I really wanted the audience, you know, non-Tetris people who didn't know, to think from the first moments of the show that it could go any way. Jonas could win it. Terry could win it because, boy, we're spending a lot of time with Terry. Looks like Terry could, you know, he's saying these things like I could really go all the way. People are talking about Terry like, oh, he's got this, you know, a 19 max out. He's got the earliest max out. All this stuff is going on because Terry was really rocketing at that time. He'd really gone from a point of being pretty good to being in the contention to be the champion.
Yeah.
And that he got third is like really strong evidence of how that worked. But part of it was, I mean, I feel like Terry's someone we can relate to the human story of him, because the way he starts his story, like he says, you know, my name is Terry Daniel Purcell II, and I say the second, and he says, yeah, my dad died before I was born. Never got to meet the guy. And that's the first thing that we learn about Terry. And then the next thing we learn about Terry is that like Tetris was this escape from a tough childhood, and that is the function it has played in his life. I'm like, okay, I get that at an emotional level, and it gives some emotional weight to Tetris.
Yeah.
That people saying, because if you ask someone, why do you play Tetris? Why do you want to win? Sometimes the answer is, I'm competitive and I just like to win things. In Terry's case, it was like, he would put himself into this game to insulate himself from what was going on around him.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of us can relate to that and say, oh, so this matters to you at a level that's like internal. And I thought that was really special and different than everybody else. So I wanted to go in through Terry and then to meet everybody else. And also I wanted people to feel it when we lose Terry, to be like, oh, he's not going to make it all the way. I wanted to put him way at the end, you know, and then it's back to this, you know, head to head, the Clash of the Titans again. But that, and again, when you go into a film, you don't know that guy's going to be in the top 3. You have no idea.
Yeah.
So you just sort of hope. You just like put a bunch of energy into these people and hope that you have enough to make it all work out.
Yeah. So, Best of 5 is now, it was 10 years ago that you shot it. You constructed it with post-its. And how did you write the narration, like the script for the narration? Like, how did you do that? Because when I think when we last talked, it wasn't recorded yet. So when was that recorded, and how did you write the narration? And did you try to get like at that moment in time where the Tetris scene was, did you try to implement that into the narration?
A little, that last part, trying to integrate the present into it, a little bit. And so the big challenge there was time. Like, what time are we occupying when we're talking? Like, because the commentary occupies this odd time warpy time, you know, and the guys say that, they're like, well, it's currently, you know, they didn't even say that it's 2021, but it was like July 2021 when we shot that. They're like, okay, so we're going to go back through like a time portal that's basically 7 years ago or whatever it was.
Yeah.
For them, the time, they occupied that very easily. Like, they seemed to just know, okay, you know, they would hint at things that might happen in the future, you know, because they were there, you know. But that was clear. I didn't actually have the narration written when they did that, though. I wrote it after that. So the way that the narration happened was we would do these little scenes, like one by one. Carl would say, okay, there's a scene here called, you know, I don't know, Intro to Terry, for example.
Yeah.
He's like, what's important? And I'm like, okay, well, we want to touch on Terry's childhood, Terry introducing himself. Terry's a teacher. He spends a bunch of time on this. You know, here's some like basic facts, and his history in going in previous years as much as we can. And so he's like, okay, and he put that together. And in scenes like that, when there would need to be, there wasn't just a clip of a person talking, he would often put in temporary narration, or he would just text me and say, there's a part here where there's a gap. Like, what do we put here? And I would write a line, or he would say the line. And then I'm like, okay, well, that's the beginning of our narration script, right?
Yeah.
So that was like the bare bones, like the initial outline. And then what would happen is I strung all the scenes together in order. So in episode 1, you got this, 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 and this. And I'm like, okay, so what is missing? So coming at this, if I imagine that I don't know anything about this, what needs to be explained to me in the voice of the narrator? And that's a hard thing to do. Like, it's hard to really do it, but it's not that hard. You just try to think hard and then you just like write it down.
Yeah.
So I wrote it out as essentially almost like a script. You've got all these like quotes, like a transcript, right? And I'd have quotes and I'd be like, okay, there's parts here where I can just jump in and have somebody say, you know, the tournament happens inside a larger game expo because it's kind of important to say, because why is there so many people here or whatever?
Yeah.
Stuff like that. So I remember I sat on my back porch and watched a rough cut that I had of the scenes just in order. And I kept flagging things we didn't know. And then I wrote the lines. And then I would go through and kind of try to polish those lines to make sense in terms of the order of information. So there hopefully wouldn't be big gaps.
Yeah.
And if there's things related to time, like when we're explaining Tetris, I'm like, okay, look. And by the way, when we did that, this is all pre-game crash, all the narration and the pickups, like we changed some things, came back, brought the narrator back in. By the way,
Yeah.
the narrator is Josh Boykin. Josh Boykin runs a thing called IntelliGame and streams frequently. He's a really cool like games critic and writer, and he lives in Portland. He's a really great guy and a great friend. And even when we were in the booth, like in this room with the mic set up, he'd look at some of these lines and be like, like, you sure we should say it this way? I'm like, actually, you're right. Let's fix that. And he would just like change a line and we would like update that on the script. So even down to the moment of saying the words, changes were occurring, which is kind of dicey. You want it to be more locked in, but that was just sort of how it went. And I knew I'd be able to bring him back one time. So I'd have little temporary bits where I'm like, I would do it. So it'd be like, Josh doing his thing in his voice. And I'd be like, and then this person played that person, like there'd be this other voice. So that's kind of how that went. And yeah, I did realize in, for example, explaining Tetris, like I had to put in a couple of throwaway lines that were like, in the future, players would develop techniques to handle high-speed play. This is a way to be like, by the way, tapping and rolling are really important. They're out of scope for this movie, because if I were to be like, okay, here's the thing, it's like important, it never happens in the movie.
No.
So I felt like that was the cutoff in my mind, was like, until we get to the end of episode 5 and we kind of catch up with some people, I didn't want to get into it. And I also omitted Joseph entirely from the movie, because Joseph is really the big missing factor. Basically because I never actually got a film release from Joseph and had no footage of him talking or permission to use footage of him.
Yeah.
And I felt like introducing a character after the action has ended and saying, oh, by the way, this guy came in and revolutionized the whole thing and brought in a whole new generation. Like, that's true, but it's also confusing if the audience is like, wait, who's this guy? And then the movie's over. So I just left that out because I'm like, okay, again, that's 20, whatever it is, 18 and onward.
18, yeah.
That's too far after where we're kind of closing up. So
yeah,
there were some decisions around that were complicated.
So, and by the time that the narration was recorded, it was like 2023, I think.
Gosh, probably. It was pretty late. Yeah, because I think the second round of it was late 2023. The first round of it might have been late 2022, I think. I'd have to look it up on my little thing. But
yeah,
we did a big round of it. It took 8 or 10 hours. This room got really hot. Josh, total trooper, just kept going. But we had, literally 8 hours of tape. And so one of the things I ran into was occasionally you'd have like a slight, I would have written the line wrong and I would need a slightly different thing. I was able to go in and find other lines and cut little parts out of them. At one point I had him say 1984, but I wanted him to say 1985. And I had him saying 5, and you can just smush those together and it sounds pretty normal, actually.
Yeah.
So I was able to kind of like reconstruct a few things like that. But yeah, there were some changes where I brought him in to like, for example, before each match, there's a little intro with a graphic. That wasn't there. Like, I made that after the initial recording. So I wrote little things for him to say, like, to decide the winner of the upper right-hand quadrant, so-and-so, faces off against so-and-so. So we had to record all that stuff in like December of 2023, I want to say.
Yeah. So,
and I was hoping I had everything. It's like, if I don't have it now, I'm never going to get it,
Would that be a big problem?
Not really, because I could bring him back, like, just, he's in town. But I felt like from a financial perspective, I was already well over budget, and I felt like I just wanted, you have to draw lines, in any project where you're like, okay, past this, this is it. So I felt like bringing him in for the second round, I'm like, that's all. So things are going to happen. Game crash happened. All this other stuff happened after that. And I'm like, okay, I know it's important, but it's not in this movie. It just isn't. Sorry, not sorry. But that I had to like just draw the line there.
Like, I mean, I don't want to go into detail about the finance, but it's like you raised like $30,000.
It was like 22 on Kickstarter plus Indiegogo, minus fees.
So
yeah,
I don't know, like $19,000-$20,000 or something like that. Was that enough to cover everything until the release of Best of 5, or did you still put, or did you need to still put more money of yourself into the project?
Yeah, it was not nearly enough. It would have been enough. The original plan going into this was very different. One of the things was we were going to release everything as it happened. So we'd release episode 1 when it was done, and then 2, 3, 4, 5. It was also not going to be in 4K. It was also probably going to be shorter, honestly.
Yeah.
So that money got us through probably early 2022, and then was done. And that also is not me paying myself. So that's just me paying other contractors to do things like edit, or like the commentator guys, or renting that studio for a day. So yeah, it was not enough money. But also I kept increasing the scope. So it's kind of, and also I don't want to be like sad for me that I spent more money on my movie. It's like, that was a choice that I made, it's fine. But the result was I gotten so far into it that it was like a sunk cost problem, where I'm like, well, I'm like 90% of the way down the road, and I need to spend way more money to get the remaining 10%. And I didn't feel that I could just stop at that point because it would be very odd and broken. So I'm like, okay, well, we do need color correction. We need an actual pro to do it. So we got to pay for that. Okay, we need subtitles in languages that aren't English. We pay people to do that. Let's go ahead and do that, that kind of thing. So I just kept going, because I figured maybe I'll make that money back. Maybe I won't. If I don't, then this is basically a financial gift that I've just given to other people. Hope you like it. And, I am sitting on a mountain of like merchandise that I could reach over here and grab that is for sale right now at bestoffivemovie.com. So,
Yeah. So we're getting then close to 2024. At what point do you know, okay, this is the release date, or this should be the release date?
Well, this is kind of funny, because I was like, okay, in 2023, near the end of 2023, I'm like, at that CTWC, I'm like, look, for real, next CTWC 2024, that's it.
Yeah.
My thinking at the time was CTWC 2024 was going to be like in September, maybe October, because that's what it was in. That's what the deal was.
Yeah.
And I talked to Vince. I kind of knew that there might be some changes coming. We talked about that, and I was like, look, if you need to move this, I think that's a really good idea. Like, if I were the sole owner of a tournament and it didn't happen where I lived, I would either move the tournament, And also the problem we were running into really was the players were in school during the time of the tournament, and that's not great. So if you your top players are currently like in high school or whatever, like that's not cool. So I get this call. It's like, hey buddy, so it's going to be in like June, like early June. I think I found that out in maybe like December of 2023 or somewhere in that range, where I'm like, oh, okay. So that lit the final fire, which was like, okay, that is it. Like, I have to be done for that, and not just done at that. I have to be done before that, like, at least like a week, and also not just that, but I have to be done like a couple weeks before that, so I can get to like media and all this stuff. And so I'm looking at it, and I'm like, okay, well, I have 4 months or whatever to actually finish everything. And I made this big chart of like what's left to do and how can we do it. And I'm like, it's possible. Like, it is doable if I just work all day, every day. I never get sick. I never take a break. Like, I can do this, but boy, it's really tight. And I got COVID like right at the end of it. And I'm like, can't take a break, must keep typing, must keep editing, like, or else there's no subtitles or whatever. And it got done. But it was like, in a way, when people have a constraint like that, where they say, oh, the date is now whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's useful because it says, okay, fine. That's what it is. I can't miss that. And I just got it done. And that was very helpful. Now, again, we're going to Jonas Cup, and like between CTWC this year and Jonas Cup this year, like now I have Blu-rays, posters, like other merchandise that just wasn't done in time, because I hadn't like made it yet. Because I just finished the show like, a couple weeks earlier. So that, that's how that played out. And so the first part of this year was like this mad dash, because also part of it was December through sometime in January, I wasn't even here. I was on the East Coast helping out a family member who had surgery.
Yeah.
And so I brought the drives with me, and I had like my laptop set up in this little attic, area. And so I'd like sneak away and like do a little work. And then, go back down and try to help out and then go, just sort of do what I could on the road. But
But
even that whole time I was like, oh man, I'm like, the time is running
yeah.
out. But yeah, it worked out.
So, but isn't it hard? Like, okay, you're helping a family member. That's great cause. But like, okay, you have a deadline in your head. Do you like to work on it for like 4 or 5 hours straight, or do you like to work on it any moment that I can, even if it's half an hour?
Weirdly, kind of both. So like, I have this task system where everything I do, I put into a to-do thing. What's it called? I think it's called Things, actually. It's an
Yeah.
app. It's on like my phone and my computer. And I have a category for this project for Best of 5. And I put things in there that are like wildly different, So like there'll be a task that says like, make the subtitles for episode 7, which that will take 2 weeks to complete. And then what I'll do is duplicate that like 7 times because I'm like, or 14 times, whatever the number of days is. And I'll just like start assigning those to days. And then on my calendar, I'll lay out a big chunk of time and say, okay, well, whatever the thing is, put it here. But there came a time, when I found out from Vince, like, this is the deadline, where I'm like, okay, look, I'm close enough with the rough cuts and like, I was very far along that I could look at every episode and be like, what remains is this job. The like music has to get done. There's a little editing problem here. And then there's no subtitles. And then there's, this and this and this. There's a list, but it's like a finite known list. But there's an order to it. Because, for example, I had to make sure everything was locked in time before I sent it off to have music done by Carl. Because if I moved anything, the music would now be off or broken.
Yeah.
So we had that like lock, like a picture lock, sound lock, basically, where you say, okay, nothing can change, but I could like change the take. Like if I recorded a different take of a narration thing or like made the audio louder, like that's fine. I just can't move it really.
Yeah.
But that was when I really buckled down and made those chunks. And so the way I usually would work is I do a morning stretch, which is about 3 hours. Then I would kind of would drag in the middle of the day, take a break, and then I would come in probably at 2 p.m. and work until 5 or 6. And honestly, like I'd have these weird, like highly productive times between 4 and like 5:30 p.m. Because sometimes you'd have a day where like that whole first 2 minutes of the show, which is also basically the trailer, like it's just a slightly different edit.
Yeah.
That happened in an afternoon, like from idea to being basically done.
Yeah.
And the music didn't get done until later and stuff, but I had like a temp track in there. But basically going from, so that's to get 2 minutes of screen time basically done in like a couple hours from where there's nothing there before, that's wild. It does not happen usually. So usually like to get 30 seconds of screen time in like a full day would be about right.
I've learned from my YouTube editing and from what I see from other content creators, it takes 3 hours to edit 1 minute perfectly.
Yeah, it sounds about right. And I mean, like sometimes in this case, there's things I was doing here that like I arguably didn't have to do. Like I did color correction for the whole thing. That was Anthony Jones, AMJ 2000. And I'm actually colorblind. I can't see red and green properly. So I can't do that. I can like get kind of okay, but I just don't see that. So I didn't have to do that. I also didn't have to get like a musical score that was totally original and made for this, but I did because I thought it was important. And I also didn't have to do actual subtitles manually in English and then Finnish and now Spanish from Spain and then Spanish Latin American. And I guess there's Portuguese and I guess there's Catalan coming on soon. So like these things are things I didn't have to do, but they add a lot of time. So when you add up all that time, it's like, oh, wow. It's surprising how long like good subtitling takes. And like, honestly, on YouTube or whatever, the automatic thing is like very close.
Yeah.
But I'm like, that little difference mattered a lot to me. So some of that stuff added a lot of time. But did it matter? I don't know. Maybe somebody somewhere appreciates it. I'm not sure. But I felt proud of that. I felt like there's nowhere where I cut a huge corner and said, well, yeah, some of these shots look crappy, but whatever. No, like everything looks the way, like as best as it could. And by the way, I'm getting ready to do a thing. It'll be like later, late this month, maybe next month, where I do kind of a behind the scenes stream and show what do I mean when I say color correct. Like, what did this clip look like before AMJ fixed it?
Yeah.
Because a lot of these clips look like they were like dark, like they were muddy.
Mm.
So he's pulling like shadow detail out that's really interesting. So, I hope to show that to people, like to understand what I'm talking about.
But was the amount of work that you did every day the same, or did you felt the pressure at the end of the end of the run, like early May, so the deadline is coming, so I need to work harder and then do more?
Yeah, it was that. I mean, like this was my full-time job, but there were days when I would work for like 2 hours, to be honest. Like I'd kind of be like, well,
yeah,
I spent a lot of time like reorganizing my stuff or making sure that things are, and then once the deadlines would kick in, I'm very deadline motivated, and there really wasn't a deadline until like a firm committed deadline until that,
I feel
Pasadena
that
thing. So yeah, that was like, no, now I'm, and there would be days when I did work like a really long whole day, but not every day. So once that came in, there was like this long, I don't know, 6-month period of just like every day, often including weekends, just like all day, every day, put your butt in this chair until you've actually, the way it worked out was I had the schedule that said, you've got to do this and this and this and this in this order. And if you don't do that, it won't happen. Or you have to remove some tasks. So either do it on time or faster than on time, or don't do those things.
Yeah.
That was the way I managed it from that on, which was like, okay, well, I've got to do it that way. I hope I was right when I estimated the amount of time. If not, I just got to work harder. So that was very motivating. Yeah.
So the original PS5 series got out on Vimeo end of May. That was always the plan. The bonus episodes, currently the 6th episode, and in the future the 7th episode will also be on Vimeo. Was there any plans of talking to a streaming service, known, not known, to carry Best of 5, or was it always to be an independent production?
Yes, there were plans, and I had a couple meetings. I had a meeting with a producer, and I had a meeting with a couple filmmakers who are friends of mine. And I met with the filmmakers first because I said, look, what's the deal? Like, what do you think that, because they had seen a rough cut of in episode 1 or whatever. I'm like, okay, you get us, it's 5 episodes. It's basically, by the time I had that conversation, I was way far along. Like, we're into late 2023. And I was like, well, we got to deal with this streaming thing and see whether, your Netflixes or your Amazons or somebody wants to pick it up. So I talked to a couple filmmakers and I said, look, you've sold stuff to streaming. What did you get for that? Like, how did that deal work? And they were like very open about it. And without saying who said that to me, so we don't know what movie we're talking about, those deals are like, well, I gave either all ownership rights. So like they own everything, all merchandising, DVD, every type of right there could be. They have it forever. And they paid me a one-time fee, and there's never any like ongoing revenue. So it could blow up. It could be the next top thing on Netflix, and it doesn't matter. I take what they give me, and I'm like, great. How much did they give you? And they were like, well, it ranges from like 15,000 to maybe 50,000 on the high end, US dollars.
Yeah,
I was like, that's for like a feature documentary. I was like, oh, okay. So the upper range is maybe, if we're lucky, is maybe like 50,000.
Yeah.
Now, and that's partly because I'm nobody. Like, I don't have film credits that say like, oh, it's Brad Pitt's new movie. It's like Chris Higgins is like, I don't have other film credits I can point to and say this is going to be a smash hit because of the last thing. I have other credits in the world. I've written books. I've like done stuff, but like, it's very hard to make a case to a film distributor that I am a sure thing. So I had a meeting with a producer who was very familiar with this space and said very similar things. Said, look, here's how it would work. If a streamer wanted to make this or wanted to buy this, 2 things would happen.
Yeah.
Thing 1, they would give you a flat fee because you're nobody, and they would say, we will own everything and you will give us, we will pay this much for it. And they will assign a producer to recut your movie. Ooh, and the producer, so for example, if you can go look this up, I encourage people who are filmmakers, if you're curious, Netflix has guidelines for how docuseries are supposed to be cut. There has to be a dramatic incident like in the 8th second, then at like 45 seconds there has to be a twist or some like numbers like this, and then by like 2 minutes in there has to be like a second twist, and then, you know, et cetera. So it's like very formulaic, and it's got to have these kind of things. It's to keep people watching, basically.
Yeah.
And I looked at that and I'm like, no, thank you. Like, I already, like, being independent means I get to choose what the edit is, like the order things go in,
Yeah.
and what I think is interesting and important. Also, there isn't really a twist in this show. Like, it just is what it is. So
It's
I don't know.
straightforward.
Yeah, like, it's not like these people aren't in a cult. You know, we're not like revealing information. You know what I mean? None of them own tigers or anything. So there's nothing to reveal. We're just meeting people and then watching them play Tetris, and then they lose, and then somebody wins. So
Yeah.
I looked at that and I was like, okay, producer person, like, honestly, what do you think? And she was like, $25,000. And I'm like, I was like, look, I'll be honest. I think I can make $25,000 on YouTube ads, DVD, like Blu-rays and whatever, like mugs or whatever. She was like, yeah, and you'd have complete creative control. Like, nobody would change it. And also, if this movie blows up later, you can sell it to somebody later.
Yeah.
Like, that's not, there's nothing preventing you from doing that. So I was like, okay, well, and I ended up not pursuing that because I didn't want to, like, I feel like owning and controlling the thing that's your baby that you've worked on for literally a decade. If I had to then say, I don't own that, somebody else owns that, this didn't sit right with me. And also that wouldn't be enough money to get me out of the financial hole anyways. So that was pretty unappealing. So it just felt like there wasn't a good win there. The other big thing was I got a lot of advice from a lot of filmmakers, which was boiled down to don't put it on YouTube. And I was like, why? And they said, well, it's going to be hard to get into film festivals because, you know, whatever, or hard to like sell to a distributor. And I'm like, yeah, but what if I don't care about those things? And they were like, I don't know. Because one of the biggest things when you're a filmmaker is somebody says, how do I watch the thing you're working on? Like, you go to the dentist and they say, oh, what have you been working on?
Yeah.
Well, I just released a 5-episode documentary. Oh, how do you watch it? Well, in the previous, you know, if I'd gone to a distributor, it'd be like, well, I hope you have Netflix. I hope you have Amazon Prime. I hope you have Fubo or whatever. Go on that and search for it. No one's going to do that. Like, nobody in my family would do that. Nobody I meet randomly would do that. But the answer of like, go to YouTube. Like, go to YouTube. It's free. It's right there. People actually do that. And I've been really interested that people actually are very capable of just going to YouTube, checking it out, watching the trailer. It's 2 minutes long, you know, get a sense of whether they're even curious. So there's a point where it's like, I want people to watch it. Like, at this point, whether it's a financial success, is it a creative success? That's really important. And do I get to share it with enough people? So there is a path where you can buy it. Like, you can buy it digitally and you get bonus features and you get things that I think are worthwhile. And that's just basically, that's a way to support the artist, right? You can also buy the 3-disc Blu-ray set now on the online shop, or other stuff. And that's another way to collect a thing. Like, these are like signed and numbered, you know? So anyway, whatever. Or if you don't have that kind of money, or it's not your thing, great. Watch on YouTube if you want.
Yeah.
Cool. But I wanted to give those options to people. And if you don't have that control, you don't have those options.
True. So if in a few years' time someone comes to you and says, I want to buy it and I want to own everything, are you then open to sell it, or are you still, or do you think it will always be in my control?
Good question. I mean, probably, yeah. I'm probably open to it. I mean, it depends on the fit. There was a discussion at some point where there's a couple of these like kind of YouTube-like things. I think Nebula is one, Curiosity Stream is. I haven't had discussions with them directly, but a lot of people said, people who would know, like who work there and stuff, were kind of making noises like, you know, I bet you could make this an exclusive to those things, and they're like subscription pay things.
Yeah.
And that would be a similar kind of money. And that might be a thing. So I thought about that and I'm like, yeah, that's kind of cool. But again, it's not as widely accessible as YouTube. But yeah, in like, you know, a few years, yeah, all the options are on the table. So like, one of the things about it being on YouTube is just because it's there now doesn't mean it'll always be there.
Yeah.
So I'm not trying to like threaten anything. I don't have any plans to like pull it. Honestly, I just got monetized like a month ago. So, you know, go ahead and watch it a lot. But you know, those options are on the table. And I think that, you know, that's That's a fair thing. And I've known other filmmakers who have owned their thing for a while.
Yeah.
They've sold all the DVDs they're going to sell. They've sold all the shirts and all the stuff. And then later they're like, look, I've moved on to other projects. Somebody else just take this and send me a check periodically for whatever you get, And that makes sense, depending on whatever I do next.
Yeah. So what are your plans to do next? This decade-long project finally came to an end. The Adam Cornelia and Vince Clemente covered the 2010 tournament. You covered the 2014 tournament. So do you have plans to pursue, like 2018 is a big one to cover? Rolling is a pretty big one to cover. Do you have plans like that?
It's funny. This is the most common question I get online and in the screening in Portland. Somebody said, look, I heard something about, I don't even know if they said Game Crash or Rolling. They said, do you plan to make a follow-up on that? And my honest reaction to that is like, no, thank you. No, I like at this point, I'm at a point where I've realized a couple things about myself. One of them, quite obviously, is I'm bad at estimating the size of things in this arena. Really good at estimating like how long is it going to take me to paint the house or whatever. I'm really bad at estimating how long will it take to do a 5-hour-long creative project. And I keep thinking, oh, it's a year, or oh, it's whatever. So to embark on a project like that is asking a lot, I think, of not just me, but also my family to sort of say, hey, Chris is going to go lose more money making another Tetris thing, unless there was somebody coming in. So the way I look at it, honestly, is if somebody came to me literally tomorrow and said, I have $1 million for you to make a film. What do you got? Oh, I have ideas. The likelihood of someone coming to me with $1 million and saying that pretty low.
Pretty slim.
I don't think that's going to happen. But because the thing is, it would need to be a large. That wouldn't be $1 million, but it need to be a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
So the plan right now is, it's funny. My wife and I bought a house 5 days ago.
Oh, congratulations!
Thank you. It's very overwhelming because we're everything behind me is going to get packed up into a box very soon.
Yeah.
So I am very likely going to just enter the normal workforce for a while and go back to what I used to do, which is I've been a writer. Like I've been I've some kind of writing job, maybe podcasting, like a job where they send you a check and they pay for your health insurance. Yeah. That is the plan. And I'll still be around. Like I'll still be able to do things and, be online and support the films and whatever. But I think I'm going to take some time to do something that has boundaries, right? Because part of this work, right, like a boss, and like, you have a time when you can stop working, right?
Yeah.
Because the nature of this work is it was open-ended for many, many years. And it's just like, well, anytime you could be working, you should be working. And if you're not, it's just going to get later and later. And you're going to, I want to get into just a more standard place for at least a while, and we'll see where we go from there,
How long was you self-employed? Or was you working full-time on this project?
Oh man, I left my last full-time, like, I call it like a square job, like a regular job in 2012. So I've been independent for 12 years now. And some of those years, though, if you look at like the income graph, it is ridiculous. Like there's years that are ultra successful and then years where I lose money. And so it's like this weird thing of, up and down and up and down. And in overall, it's fine, but it's not like a great, it's been harder to find writing jobs. This is one of the biggest things I've run into is like, and I think there's a lot of reasons for that, but like, the thing I do most and best, which is write, words, it's just not worth very much to a lot of people. And so some of the things I can do, like be a manager or be a project leader or stuff like that, or technology stuff, it's worth a bit more. So I think that to make a living is probably, it may not be in as creative a field. I hope, like, I'd love to combine those things. Because one of the things I loved about doing this is like, you'd come across a problem where it'd be like, oh, I need to have a scene where I have, 5 players who I filmed against green screens with the green screen removed. I need to like move them around, animate them in and out, then show a bracket, and then like have titles come in. They have to like people like blah, 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 blah. Basically, the answer there is figure out how to do animation and then do it. And not only do it, but like do, like a B+ job, like a pretty good job. Everything on this show, I pretty much had to like learn it. I had to teach myself the thing. except for writing the score and doing the color correction and doing like the narration. Like I wrote, things, but I can't do those things. There
Yeah.
had to be somebody else. So I felt like I love the learning process. It's really fun and interesting to me, but also I'm ready to like, I sometimes have this like daydream. Imagine this, you sit at a desk and there's like a box that says in, and there's things that come into the box, like papers or something.
Yeah.
You take one and you like look at it and work on it, and you're done with it. You put it in another box called out. And when all the things in the inbox are done, you're done and you can go away.
Yeah.
That is like a literal dream of mine. I sit around and fantasize about that because right now my inbox is infinite and like floaty, and I never know when I'm done. Like right now I'm not done with episode 7. Like I'm close,
Yeah.
but I'm not done. And I'm like, when will I be done? What does done even mean? So I'm looking forward to whatever that happens.
Is episode 7 the final episode?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I mean, like it's like I am squeezing the wet towel. Like it's like there's the last drips.
Yeah.
But like I said, there's, what is this? 425 pages of interviews. There is so much other stuff that you could make a whole other thing, if you wanted to. There's also so much footage. Like the morning of the tournament, Lewis and I drove around for like a couple hours and just filmed Portland. Almost none of that is in the movie, like maybe 30 seconds during when we meet Terry and we see like some street scenes. But there's like hours of all this other stuff. There's drone footage I never used that we shot. Probably be illegal to try to shoot that same stuff today, but whatever. There's all this stuff. So I think that 7 is where we say, that's it, we're good. And really, because episode 6 is all the Jonas stuff. It's all the stuff I had with Jonas.
Yeah.
So that I felt like that was the biggest responsibility I had. And again, I didn't know about it when we last talked on this show. I didn't think that was going to be a big deal. But then I had this feeling of like, well, I don't want to die, God willing, in a long time.
Yeah.
With a hard drive over here with all this extra stuff that has Jonas stuff on it. I want to take that and not like put it publicly on YouTube necessarily, but put it out there in a way that's like accessible and easy for people who want that stuff to get it.
Yeah.
So that I'm not just sitting on it and hoarding it and hiding it, because that's creepy and weird. And also there is something therapeutic for me in sitting with that material. And I've heard this with other people where basically, I don't want to say who, but people I've talked to are like, I watched it, I cried, I watched it, I cried, and I'm like, yeah, me too. Like me working on this, when I was working on the end of episode 5, where we go into the stuff where Jonas dies, I was so upset during that editing process that I put on my headphones and I turned up music that I like so loud that I could barely hear the talking in the edit.
Yeah.
And to distract me from what was happening emotionally. And so that's how I got through that. Episode 6 rather, is a little bit less intense because now it's been another, time passes and things kind of calm down. But it still is pretty intense to sit with not just, mostly it's Jonas, but also yourself from 10 years ago and hear the questions that I asked. I'm like, oh, that's a dumb question I asked, like, I don't know why I went there, but all those things are it's intense. And so, I'm glad to move on from that stuff. And I do think 7 is going to be, by the way, right now, the rough cut of episode 7 is just under 2 hours long. There's a whole guy, Blink, John Tran, who founded Hard Drop, who we meet, we spend an hour with him. Like I've cut it down to about a half hour, but it's still like, it's a whole, like all of modern Tetris and like, what's the deal with Blink? There's a whole segment in there about that. A whole bunch of extra hairy stuff. There's a lot of cool stuff in there.
So the Best of 5 series now has a place covering part of the Tetris history. How do you look at it? Like that we covered now most important things in the Tetris history, and I think Active Order and now Best of 5 did a very well job to cover the early stage of NES Tetris, where the scene wasn't as big as it was, and then with the Boom Tetris for Jeff video that got viral, that got people into NES Tetris, and then Game Scout making content that got people into NES Tetris, Joseph winning CTWC 2018. Like, I feel now that since 2018, where Gamescom started with his YouTube channel, started with his YouTube content, the YouTube content creators covered since 2018 until now most things of NES Tetris. How do you see that?
Actually, that's exactly how I see it. I think that the Ecstasy of Order is the beginning. Best of 5 is kind of the early middle. And I really think Game Scout, and I mean, there's other content creators out there too, but like he's kind of the top of that list. David McDonald is the documentarian for the rest of it. Like you could go back and try to make something else other than what he's made. But I think if you take the work he's doing and has done, I think it is great to tell that story. And I mean, Summoning Salt is in that mix a little bit. But like there's a bunch of people who've come along and done this kind of modern documentary work in a less, like in sort of a quicker way, right? Like they're not taking 10 years or whatever, to go out and get something done. So I think that that's really healthy, frankly, because like, I also think the Scooty documentary, I mean, people probably know this, but like at Pasadena, there were multiple film crews that were not CTWC. So there was like one following our celebrity special guest. There was someone following Scooty. There was like some other one following the Tetris folks. I think that was all, but there might have even been more. So it's clear to me that there are going to be more classic Tetris related documentaries coming out. And I don't know, like the Scooty doc, I don't know anything about it. I talked to a couple people who worked on it and I was like, here's some advice I have. Like, just sort of unsolicited advice, but I was like, I was curious, but I'm just guessing what they're going to do. And I'm guessing that to them, the history probably doesn't matter a whole lot. The history is just sort of like, well, stuff happened, but then Scooty comes along and whatever Scooty does during that time, that's the core of it, right? So I think that here, well, from like 18 or so into the future, I think that that's pretty well covered already. And it might be difficult to try to cover it given the footage we already have. Because one of the troubles here was that, in 2014 and 2015, I sat down for hours and hours with people and asked really direct questions about what was happening, like walk me through your history, walk me through what happened this year, et cetera, et cetera. We didn't necessarily do that ever again. Like there's a little bit of footage here and there in certain years. And I have like a gigantic hard drive over here of like all the cameras from all the years. Because part of being the head camera op is you bring this, like, this is actually this is like a bunch of SD cards. And you put these in all the cameras, and then every night you take them back and they're labeled as like camera 1, 2, 3, whatever. You put them on a hard drive. So we have like the tournament, but there's not really a lot of interviewing in that. Sometimes we would send somebody out, like Kingsman went out with a roving camera and got some interviews a couple years, I think. But it's difficult to get the seed footage aside from, for example, what David's done on the Game Scout channel. Like he's got his point of view. He is character in it and he's the narrator and stuff. So I'm not sure that there's enough footage to make something other than what's happening now. And well, we totally could do that. Somebody could do that. But like I was saying, like, I'm not sure that that's me. I do have advice. If anybody has any questions. Eric ICX, for example, is working on a thing, I think, about Fractal right now. So he was shooting some stuff in 2024 at Pasadena about that. So there's stuff coming. And, I think that's my hope. Kind of the beginning of your question was just like, what is this? And I hope that this sits as suggested viewing, like I think Ecstasy of Order is a great film on its own, and it tells you kind of where this all came from. I think that this is like the follow on to that. If you want to know how the scene developed after the first year, which was kind of weird, we didn't really have the bracket worked out. How did the tournament modernize? And then of course, then just watch everything Game Scout ever made, basically. Like that's what you need to see. And other folks too. But honestly, I think he's the top.
Eric ICX, you should watch that, the Summoning Salt video. All my podcasts is also now part of lore.
PDP is a real resource because, like, where else are you going to get, a multi-hour conversation with top players and organizers? Because the thing is, a lot of the organizers don't talk a whole lot outside of being at a tournament, So being able for you to sit down with like, Adam and Vince for a long form discussion That's very unusual. Like,
Yeah.
I think they've only been interviewed twice, by you and by me, as far as I know, in like a long context.
Yeah, for multiple, for like an hour plus, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that kind of thing is, and I mean, the people who care about that are people who are pretty interested in Tetris for sure. But weirdly enough, like that number, I remember it's like funny. In 2014, we stood in that room and looked at the crowd and thought, this is enormous. Like this is so big. There's like hundreds of people watching. And we thought like that's the ceiling. Like we're at the very top of what it can be. And then, I remember standing there in, I don't know, 2022 or something, and the stream hits 25,000 people or some number like that. And I'm like, I can't even understand what that is. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know what that looks like. I don't know how many people that's a lot of people. And so, I mean, over the years, the number of people who care about Classic Tetris just keeps going up. And I think that probably will continue because I keep thinking there's no way it can get bigger. And I keep being wrong.
It's,
So,
it's now time for the content creators to try to carry the scene from for the outside. Like the players playing with CTM, CTL, CTWC, but the content creators giving backstory to the community, because I don't think that a documentary like you did will work for now,
right.
for the current team.
Right. That is a good point because the size is a problem. Like the bracket is so big now and there's so many possible winners that it'd be very hard to get good coverage of all those people. I mean, you could do it. It would just be even more difficult than it was, back then. And so that's a tough thing to do, especially if you try to do it beforehand. Like if you came in afterwards and just found whoever won and who they played along the way, you could interview them, assuming they didn't like fly back to wherever they're from,
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a tough thing. And, also I just wanted to say, like when I was a teenager, I always wanted to make a feature documentary film. That's something I've always wanted to do. And so I did it. Now my feature is 5 hours long. It's much longer if you watch the bonus features,
Yeah.
But I feel like I did that. I feel like it's a good piece of work. I'm proud of it. And, I said what I wanted to say. And I'm really grateful that there's a bunch of folks out there who care enough to stick around and watch you and me talk about it. I'm grateful to you for bringing me back for another long talk about this, because I care a lot about this sport. I don't watch any sports, dude. Like this is my sport. So whenever, Tetris is on, I'm usually watching whatever's on, and I like it and it's my thing. And so to be able to make something that somebody else will be able to enjoy because they also like that thing is a real privilege, and it's not that common for me to be able to do. So I'm privileged and proud to have done this work, and I'm also grateful that so many people way back in 2020 opened their wallets at a time that was really extremely uncertain and just said, "Here's money, go for it."
Yeah.
That's what made it possible to proceed at all. And that has changed a lot for me. And so I'm grateful.
So, what will your future be in Tetris? Like, Jonas Cup is coming up, you will be working the Jonas Cup, but what will your future be in Tetris after that?
Probably a couple max outs, 1.5.
Rollover.
Rollovers, my PB is just under 200K right now. I think I can improve that if I plug in my TV and play. I think my future in Tetris, I'm 46, and there's a point where your hair turns gray a little. Then there's a second point where your hair turns gray mostly.
Yeah.
And you start to have that feeling of like, maybe what I have now is a perspective on what I can offer to people. Like I can tell people things that I've learned, but also I can one of the things I have power to do now is to hand that power to other people. So one thing that would make me happiest is if somebody came along and said, you know what I want to do is I want to run cameras at CTWC and I want to do the best job. I want to do better than you did, me. And I want to say, like, if that happens, hell yeah. Like, come on over. I will tell you everything I know. I'll show you all the historical stuff. Like, let's do that, because I don't want to not do it, but I don't want to be like 65 and like,
Still do
oh, okay, we got to set up all the camcorders again and all
exactly.
on the HDMI cords. Like, there's a point where you can gracefully kind of say, okay, I've been working this thing for 12 years. I'll work it more. But like, there is some point where it would be natural to say, if somebody wants to step in, that would be lovely, because that's what health is in a volunteer driven community, is for people to keep coming in. And tons of people are doing that, right? Like, there's lots of shows happening. A lot of it's online, but in person, we do need people to do those things. And by the way, like, the majority of the crew that worked in Pasadena was brand new to the event. Like, I was the veteran, and there was like Ren had done a bunch of tournaments, and Richard Wolf had experience, but like, there were a lot of people in the core crew who had never been to CTWC, didn't know what it was, which is why we had a tech things where it's like, oh, we cut away from gameplay while it's happening. That lesson was learned very quickly, but the fact that that's possible now is great. Like, we can bring new people into it, and I want to do that. I think I'll be a camera operator for a long time. Maybe I'll find something else to do. Not really good at commentary. If anybody ever wants to make a Tetris movie of any kind, I have a lot to say about it. I've thought about writing about this, because it's not just Tetris advice. It's just like, how do you shoot an interview? And also, how do you do it for no money? I have a lot to say about that at this point. So maybe I can help, right?
I think I have my say in that too, for doing this for no money for the past 4 years.
You have a real perspective on this. Like, how do you do a thing? How do you keep showing up when it doesn't, like, no one's handing you big paychecks, right? It's like, you have to have a reason to do it that's not financially motivated, which is part of this thing of like, I want it to exist. And like, if it doesn't, part of the beauty of a community that's relatively small like this is, if you want it to exist, make it. Just make it.
Yeah.
And then if you like give up on it, okay. Like, but like Chris Tang says at the end of the show, like, it's important while you're enjoying it to enjoy it and to tell people, to say what you appreciate about it. And like, Frank, I appreciate you. I appreciate the show. I've listened to like 90% of them, and a couple of them are like halfway done because I got busy, but they're sitting in my queue, right? And there's like this thing where I'm like, oh, I'm in the mood, right? I want to hear Tetris people talk about Tetris. And I think that's really valuable. And I hope that last part of episode 5 means things for other people who aren't, me or Chris Tang or whatever, that message will get a lot across to people, because that's kind of what Jonas was trying to tell us with Love You, Miss You, Mean It. Like, that guy meant it, and it shows in his behavior. And I hope that comes across in this show.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it was a very great way to end the series, and it was fitting for the hard work you put in, never giving up, and the hard work that everyone puts in. Like, when life got rough, you got great friends, Carl King, that helped you. So I think it's fitting. It's tragic for that this had to happen, but it's also fitting for what Tetris and the Tetris community stands for, and the people who are passionate about and making content and never giving up.
I think you just closed the show. I think it's beautiful.
Chris, thank you so much for joining me on the season 5 premiere of the Piece Dependency Podcast.
Season 5, best of 5. Thank you, Frank. Woo!
And with that all being said, this is the end of the Piece Dependency Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Follow us on the socials. Have a great Tetris month. And I will see you all in October. Bye!